Hello, and welcome all to Movie Hunter, the show that tracks down the quality of all sorts of movies. My name is Hunter, and today in the fourth episode, our target is Monsters University, produced by Pixar Animation Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. The film's existence was first conceived as a sequel to Monsters, Inc., ordered by Disney as they had the rights to the Pixar's franchises, though had not fully purchased them yet. Through disagreements with Disney and Pixar, Disney made a company called Circle 7 Animation, specifically for making Pixar sequels. However, arrangements would be made, ending in Disney purchasing Pixar, and Circle 7 Animation becoming defunct, with all their planned movies being cancelled. These movies include Finding Nemo 2, Toy Story 3, and Monsters, Inc. 2, Lost in Scaradise. After this, a Monsters, Inc. follow-up was planned by Pixar, but in the form of a prequel. Monsters University released theatrically on June 21st, 2013, and the Pixar short film The Blue Umbrella would be shown alongside it. This became Pixar's 14th film after 2002's Brave and before 2015's Inside Out. The film was directed by Dan Scanlon, who would go on to direct Onwards in 2020. The screenplay and story were by Daniel Gerson, Robert L. Bard, and Dan Scanlon. Randy Newman returned to compose the music, and Corey Ray was the producer. The cinematography was by Matt Apsbury and Jean-Claude Kalach, and was edited by Greg Snyder. The cast includes the return of Billy Crystal, John Goodman, and Steve Buscemi, and also includes Peter San, Joel Murray, Sean P. Hayes, Dave Foley, Charlie Day, Helen Mirren, and Nathan Fillion. The film did well financially, earning $743.6 million on a budget of $200 million, becoming Pixar's third highest grossing film and the 11th highest grossing animated film at the time of its release. The film received mixed reviews, with more positive ones than negative, but ultimately a rather just okay standing. Monsters University was nominated for 26 awards, of which it won 3 of, becoming Pixar's first film to not be nominated by the Oscars or the Golden Globe. The film follows Mike before the events of Monsters, Inc., and shows his inspiration of being a scarer in his work to be one. This leads to his acceptance at his dream college, Monsters University. Here he meets his roommate, Randall, who is surprisingly nice, more on that later, and his soon-to-be rival, Sully, who is naturally talented and doesn't show much effort as a result, compared to Mike, who puts everything he has into studying and learning. Through his rivalry with Sully, the two of them get kicked out of the scaring program after drawing Dean Hardscrabble's attention and being tested by her personally. She tells Sully that he doesn't know enough and tells Mike that he isn't scary. Mike and Sully, however, get a second chance when Mike remembers that there is an event held at the university called the Scare Games. Mike teams up with the fraternity Oozma Kappa, a team consisting of monsters who have been kicked out of the scaring program for not doing well enough. Mike makes a deal with Dean Hardscrabble that if their team wins, they will all be allowed back into the scaring program, but if they lose, Mike will leave Monsters University forever. Sully also manages to join in on this deal after discovering that they are short a member, as the two-headed monster only counts as one person. Here, Sully and Mike are forced to work together, and Mike must use his knowledge to train the other members. They compete through various games in which the last place fraternity gets eliminated each game. After one of these games, Dean Hardscrabble gets into Sully's head about Mike not being scary. Eventually, they reach the final game against the fraternity Roar Omega Roar, who had previously hired Sully, but kicked him out after his removal from the scaring program, with the replacement being Randall. In the final event, each member of the team gets to show their top scaring, and Mike, being the member to go last, gets the final scare that wins them the victory. After the initial celebration, Mike finds that someone has rigged the settings so that Mike would win the final game no matter what, and he finds out that this person was Sully. After Sully confesses to Mike that he did it because Mike isn't scary, Mike breaks into the human world to prove everyone who's been telling him throughout his life wrong. However, when he attempts to scare the children, they laugh at him. And through the commotion, the human police get involved, causing Mike to flee and Sully to go into the human world and chases after him. At the nearby lake, the two talk it out and work together to get back to the monster world, combining Sully's talents with Mike's knowledge. From there, the two are promptly kicked out of Monsters University, and Sully convinces Mike to join him at a job in the mailroom of Monsters Incorporated, and try to work their way up to the top. The first thing I'd like to talk about is how this movie is a good example of the things necessary to make a good prequel. Pixar has a good number of well-liked sequels, primarily Toy Story and Inside Out sequels, but Monsters University serves as their first and currently only prequel. Luckily, Monsters University keeps up the good world building present in Monsters Inc., and even expands upon it in some ways that don't make any scene in Monsters Inc. not make sense. My personal favorite example of this is the way they expand upon the idea of strategies in scaring, which not only are nice details to hear about, as they don't intrude on the main story, but actually end up supporting the themes of the movie. The film also makes some changes with the original characters that make a lot of sense. Mike and Sully, for example, are quite different from how they are in Monsters Inc. Mike, for instance, is not overly sarcastic and self-obsessed. Instead, he is more studious and focused on his goals. However, by the end of the film, when he learns that he makes a good coach, you can see how he would become the person he is in Monsters Inc., as traces of his original character are still there. Same goes for Sully. He is very reckless and an athlete, but also has a kind side. This allows the audience to see how he would become the more kind-hearted person he is in Monsters Inc. Randall is the third and final character brought over from Monsters Inc., with a major role in the story, but he is a slightly more interesting case, as this is a big part of what I want to talk about with his character. Randall was definitely the most interesting choice to bring over from Monsters Inc., and even more interesting was making him a good guy. When Mike walks to his dorm room and talks about how he is about to meet his new best friend, the audience thinks that it's going to be Sully, only for the surprise reveal that it is Randall, and that he is much kinder. Now, when creating a reveal, I believe there are two majorly important things that ensures that it will be a well-written reveal, and I believe that there are two majorly important things that ensures it is a well-written reveal, and that is that it makes sense and isn't just a reveal for the sake of being a reveal. Randall being Mike's roommate is something that I find both well done but also underwritten. Like I talked about for Mike and Sully, I think it makes perfect sense that Randall becomes the person he does by the events of Monsters Inc., with him being jealous of Mike and Sully's victory that resulted in him being humiliated and kicked from the popular fraternity. However, there are very few character-moving scenes for him. Instead, we see him in various positions, and it is left to us to fill in the blanks. Randall's joining of Roar Omega Roar is completely off-screen, and instead he just tells Mike. From there, we see him from time to time, but it isn't until the final events of the scare games where he plays an important role. Here, he and Sully are the ones competing, and due to the massive roar Sully makes, Randall falls and messes up his roar, causing him to state that it will be the last time he loses to Sully, which is very odd and very random, as the two never speak to each other in the entire movie. Finally, we see Roar Omega Roar offer Sully his position back after his victory in the scare games, but we don't see Randall, and it becomes up to the audience to piece together that he was likely kicked out. and that's all we see from him. Like I said, I don't dislike him in this movie entirely, but I really wish they gave him more of a reason to return, rather than just the initial shock. Now I'd like to get into my favorite part of the film, Mike's character arc. I specifically chose this film to review right after Fantastic Mr. Fox because they both have a similar theme that runs very counteractively to many films. Things you can't do. It seems a bleak message at first, and to a certain degree it is, but it isn't until you get the full message that it really starts to click. For Mr. Fox, he needs to learn that he can't be the person he once was, but to appreciate what he has now. For Mike, he, from a very young age, knew that he wanted to be a scarer, and he worked the rest of his life to get into Monsters University and become one of the greats, proving everyone wrong. And when he gets in, he does greatly, getting good grades and proving his rival, Sully, wrong by running circles around him. However, an issue arises when it came to the final exam of the semester that involved putting his knowledge to the test by applying them in a simulator. Mike argues with Sully, though, and draws Dean Hardscrabble's attention, and she tests him personally. I'll get into specifics about the Dean later, but the important thing is that she targets Mike's biggest weakness. He is not scary. That is the reality that Mike doesn't want to face. He is not scary, and no matter what he does, he will never be scary. He tries to defy this with all of his might by working harder than ever in the hardest circumstances. He recruits the least scary team with the least scary members and boldly states to the world that he will win. He trains the members of Oozma Kappa until they are the scariest they can be, and they make it all the way to the finale, and they win. Only, they didn't win. Well, Mike didn't win. His system was rigged so that he could snap and the system would count it as a record-breaking roar. And it was by his closest friend, Sully, who, like everyone else in his life, doesn't believe that Mike is scary. This puts Mike at his most desperate. As far as the world knows, Mike proved them wrong. But Mike doesn't even consider this. He needs to prove it to himself now. He breaks into the human world to not just simulate scaring, but have the real deal. He goes to scare a room full of children at summer camp, but they laugh at him. Here in the human world, Mike comes face to face with reality. He is not scary. He confesses this to Sully, and they get back to the monster world by combining Sully's skill with Mike's knowledge. They are both kicked out, and Mike goes to move back home, but not before Sully has another talk with him. Here, Sully tells Mike where he belongs. He makes Mike realize all that he has done. Mike, despite all odds, managed to get into Monsters University after being kicked out. And after being kicked out, found a way for him, Sully, and the least scary monsters on campus to have another chance at the scaring program. He managed to train these monsters and teach them how to play to their individual strengths. He took the team to where no one expected them to get, and far beyond. He is singularly responsible for bringing the team to the finals and surprising the intimidating Dean Hardscrabble. Sully tells Mike that he knows more about scaring than anyone, and should train monsters to improve their scaring. And so, Mike and Sully team up and start working at Monsters Inc. at the mailroom, and work their way up to scarers, which transitions nicely into the events of Monsters Inc., where we see them working greatly as a team. I'm glad this movie gave Mike a chance in the spotlight, as Sully has the spotlight in Monsters Inc. This is, without a doubt, my favorite aspect of this movie. This message is a very good one, and serves to me as the greatest piece of evidence to the greatness of this film, as I feel a lesser one would have ended on Mike winning the final game on his own accord. But this movie decides to not have that, and instead delivers a message that I find to be very important. Sometimes in life, there are things that just can't be done, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to look at it differently and find things you can do. The next thing about Monsters University that I find interesting, that I haven't seen anyone else mention, is the dean of the school, Dean Hardscrabble. What I find so interesting about this character is that she always gives harsh reality checks to Mike and Sully. In her first scene, she tells all the students that at the end of the semester, there will be a final exam that, if failed, will result in being kicked out of the scaring program. When the final exam comes around, Mike and Sully cause a commotion, resulting in Dean Hardscrabble testing them each personally. She targets Mike and Sully's biggest weaknesses. For Mike, she gives him basic instructions, but stops him before he can even start, saying she's seen enough, targeting the fact that Mike isn't scary and that there isn't anything he could have done to change that. For Sully, she gives very precise guidelines that he doesn't listen to and does his regular lore, and she tells him that, given the information she provided, the type of lore he used wouldn't have worked, targeting Sully's reliance on his natural talents. When Oozma Kappa wins the game that gets them into the final game, Sully talks to Dean Hardscrabble, and the Dean informs Sully that she knows they won't win because Mike is not scary. This is another example of the Dean delivering reality to a character. Her statements make Sully train with Mike that night, and Sully forces Mike to dig deep inside himself and deliver his best scaring. But reality has set in now, and Sully feels the need to go and rig the game. Another detail that not many remember is that the Dean is the creator of the scare games, whose slogan is, "Prove you're the best." The games are specifically made to show the world who the best really are in reality. The Dean also insists that she is not easily surprised, which I find to be a really nice moment when she says that Mike surprised her at the end of the film. He surprised her because he defied the harsh reality that he is not scary. Not by becoming scary, but by finding other areas in scaring that he is better suited to. The Dean, in conclusion, I find adds a nice layer to the theme of this movie, and I think is not talked about most of the time. She provides a cold, harsh, but ultimately truthful reality of the situation, but can also be overcome by doing what Mike did. The final point I'd like to talk about is the thing that most people find to be the weakest part of this movie, the scare games themselves, which take up the second act of the film, as well as the members of Oozma Kappa, who most find to be unmemorable. Personally, I like the members of Oozma Kappa more than most, but at the same time I must admit that they are not the best side characters ever. They have very small distinctions from one another in terms of personality, and don't really have many strong character moments. As for the scare games, I don't find them boring. I think they are fun and creative challenges that factor well into the art of scaring, but at the same time, the film doesn't have time to fully flesh out all of the individual games, which results in no one game feeling all that special, but also taking up a good amount of screen time. While I personally don't mind these elements that much, I will say that if you do end up not liking these elements, they will most certainly affect your view of this film as a whole. I give Monsters University an 8 out of 10. It is, in my opinion, the film more than justifies bringing back the franchise by delivering a worthy expansion to the Monsters, Inc. world building and cast of characters. With a strong central theme and a good story, I think that an 8 out of 10 fits the movie well, though I will note that some of the elements bring it close to the 7 out of 10 range. The second act and side characters can be a drag for some. The stuff with Randall I think is quite underdone, and the story, while good, feels a bit clunky at times. However, it is not without its merits. I find that Sully, and especially Mike, are really well written overall, providing a great film to me. Well, that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to share any opinions you had on the movie. A new episode releases each week, so stay tuned to see which film I cover next. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.